April 29, 1945. Sunday afternoon. A battalion of American soldiers approaches a railroad siding outside Munich and stops. I remember the smell before anything else. Before the cars, before the bodies. It just hit you. Like a wall. 39 sealed boxcars. Sitting on the tracks. No movement. No sound. And the question isn't what's inside them. You already know. The question is, what does a man do after he opens the door? Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks commands the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment. His men pry open the first car. Inside, approximately 50 bodies. Stacked. The subsequent cars hold as many as 100 each. 2,310 dead in total. Prisoners evacuated from Buchenwald, transported in sealed cars without food or water, left to perish during the journey. Battle-hardened men. Sicily. Anzio. Southern France. 500 days of combat. And they're on their knees. Vomiting. Crying. Some just standing there, not moving. That detail matters. These weren't green recruits. These were men who'd absorbed more violence than most humans encounter in a lifetime. And still, this broke them. That's before they enter the camp itself. That's before they encounter the 30,000 prisoners barely clinging to life inside the wire. That's before the full scope of Dachau becomes visible. So here is the real question, the one historians are still arguing over 80 years later. Within hours of liberation, between 35 and 50 SS guards do not survive the encounter. Some at the hands of American soldiers. Some at the hands of prisoners who had been waiting years for exactly this moment. Was it justice, or was it something else? But before the full account is revealed, I want to hear from the experts in our community. What is the one piece of World War II history that has always haunted or fascinated you most? Or, if you're a collector, tell us about the most significant artifact in your archives. We'd love to see the history you're preserving. If these untold stories of the Great War resonate with you, consider joining our ranks by liking the video and subscribing with the bell on. Share this journey with someone who values the truth behind the shadows. March 22, 1933. Dachau opens in an abandoned munitions factory northeast of Munich. It is one of the first camps established by the Nazi regime. Political prisoners first, communists, social democrats, dissidents. Heinrich Himmler announces it publicly. Publicly. That detail is rarely emphasized. There was no secrecy in the beginning. The regime wanted people to know it existed. Over 12 years of operation, Dachau becomes the template. The SS refines its methods here: systematic dehumanization, forced labor, medical experimentation, and exports those methods to Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, and hundreds of other sites. Over 200,000 prisoners pass through. At least 41,500 perish. The actual toll is likely higher. Records were destroyed. 41,000. You say the number, and it doesn't land. Not really. Not until you see one face. One set of eyes. Dachau's medical program is documented. Prisoners are subjected to hypothermia experiments, altitude pressure chambers, malaria infection, forced seawater consumption. Hundreds do not survive. The findings are written up as scientific papers. Methodical. Clinical. Dr. Sigmund Rascher sends Himmler detailed reports on how long subjects endure freezing water immersion before they succumb. The horror isn't only in the act. It's in the paperwork. The bureaucratic language wrapped around atrocity. That's what distinguished Dachau from ordinary cruelty. It was industrial. Organized. Proud of itself. By late April 1945, Germany is collapsing. Dachau holds over 67,000 prisoners. The camp was designed for 6,000. 67,000. In a space built for 6. People sleeping in shifts because there aren't enough bunks. That's not overcrowding. That's suffocation. Food rations have essentially ceased. A cup of watery soup. A piece of bread. Typhus spreads unchecked through the barracks. 15,000 prisoners are infected. 200 to 300 perish daily. The crematorium cannot keep pace. And the prisoners know something is coming. Rumors circulate that the SS intends to ensure no witness survives liberation. That fear, the fear of surviving this long only to be eliminated at the final hour, is almost unbearable to consider. On April 26, SS Hauptsturmführer Martin Weiss, The camp commandant flees. He abandons his post, leaving behind roughly 560 personnel. SS disciplinary troops, Hungarian Waffen-SS soldiers stationed nearby. These are the men who remain when the Americans arrive. He ran. The man who ran this place for years, he just ran. Which tells you something about what he knew was coming. And what he believed he deserved. That same day, the SS orders a forced evacuation of approximately 10,000 prisoners from the subcamps. Death marches south toward the Alps. Groups of 1,000 or more, under guard, on foot. Anyone who cannot maintain the pace does not survive the encounter. The roads through Bavaria are marked by those who fall. The 45th Infantry Division approaches from the south. The 42nd Infantry Division converges from the west. Both units have sustained roughly 75% casualty rates over 500 consecutive days of combat. 3 in 4 men who began with these divisions are gone. Think about what that does to a unit's psychology. You are not the man who started this war. The men beside you are not the men who started beside you. You have absorbed loss on a scale that rewires something fundamental. Sparks Battalion reaches the railroad siding around 2 in the afternoon. Private First Class John Lee opens the first car. His account is direct. The stench was immediate, bodies stacked densely, skeletal, some still fleshed, too tightly packed to count. Car after car. The same. Over 2,000 who had perished in transit. I've heard men describe it since. Every one of them says the same thing. It wasn't the sight. It was the smell. The smell tells you before your eyes do. Before your mind can prepare. Sparks attempts to maintain order. His men are shaking. Several weep openly. These are men who have not wept in years. And then, they move toward the gate. What happens in the next several hours is disputed. Witness accounts conflict. Photographs exist. Film footage exists. But the sequence is unclear. What is clear is the outcome. Something breaks. That's the only way I can describe it. Something that training had been holding together, just breaks. At one guard tower, 17 SS personnel who have descended with hands raised do not survive. In the coal yard near the rear entrance, 16 SS men are placed against a wall. In a separate incident, surrendered soldiers in a boxcar are shot. The wounded among them are shot again. These are not combat deaths. These are extrajudicial. Under the laws of war, they are war crimes. That word has to be said clearly. And it doesn't close the question. It opens it. When prisoners realize liberation has arrived, they move. Some scale the wire. Some force through gates. They find SS guards who haven't fled. One prisoner testified later, "We were animals to them for all those years." And in that moment, it was like a birthday. Like finally being allowed to exist. 3 young Jewish inmates locate a man they recognize, their most sadistic tormentor from the camp, concealed in a barn, dressed as a peasant. They recognize him despite the disguise. He does not survive the encounter. Under law, that is vigilante killing. Under any framework that values due process, it cannot be sanctioned. But under the moral calculus of a man who has watched his family perish, who has been subjected to the darkest depths of the regime for years, who has waited for this single moment. How do you prosecute that? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the one the military actually had to answer. Lieutenant General Alexander Patch orders an investigation. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker, Assistant Inspector General, spends weeks reviewing evidence, photographs, and witness testimony. His June 1945 report concludes that violations of the Geneva Convention occurred. That courts-martial should be convened. The report reaches General Patton. Patton, who weeks earlier visited Ohrdruf camp and was so overcome he had to step away. He knows what these men walked into. His decision, no charges will be filed. His written reasoning, the offenses are minor compared to the atrocities committed by those being guarded. And that's it. Case closed. Except it isn't. Colonel Charles Decker's legal opinion enters the official record. He writes that yes, international law appears to have been violated. But given what combat troops encountered upon arrival, fixing individual responsibility is neither just nor practical. In other words, it was a war crime. And no one will answer for it. So where does that leave us? The law is clear. Surrendered combatants are protected. The moment they raised their hands, they were entitled to that protection. It was not honored. And the men who ran that camp for 12 years, the men who oversaw the medical experiments, the forced labor, the starvation, they had protection the moment they raised their hands. That's the system working correctly? Maybe the more honest question isn't whether what happened at Dachau on April 29th was legal. It clearly wasn't. Maybe the question is, what does justice look like when the scale of the crime is so vast that the existing frameworks for justice simply don't fit? The 3 young men who found their tormentor in that barn. The prisoners who acted in the chaos of liberation. The American soldiers who crossed a line that their training had always held firm. Were they criminals? Or were they men finally standing inside a place where the usual rules had never applied, and responding accordingly? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And I've been sitting with that for a long time. So have the historians. So have the survivors. So has everyone who's ever studied what happened at Dachau's gates on that Sunday afternoon in April 1945. The question isn't resolved. It was never meant to be.